Hello and welcome back to Analysis with me, Oliver McTernan. Hamas and Fatah have announced today that they have reached a reconciliation deal and announced the formation of a technocrat consensus government. Well, with me in the studio to discuss this breaking news and the significance of it is Sarah Colburn, Director of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. And on Skype, we're joined by Dr. Fadi Abusidou, the UK spokesperson for Fatah. And on the phone, we are joined by the activist, author and academic, Dr. Ghada Kami. Welcome to you all. Fadi, good news for you, this reconciliation deal?
Good news indeed. The Palestinians are
but good news, I hope.
It is very good news.
How do you see it play out? Do you think Israel and the United States in particular will allow the formation of a consensus technocrat government?
We have reached a point in the Palestinian political setup and in the negotiations where external parties do not determine what happens within the Palestinian society and do not control the Palestinian politics, as was the case in the past. The Palestinian reconciliation, as it was declared and announced today by both Fatah, Hamas, and the independent participants in the reconciliation talks, reaffirms the commitment of all parties on revitalizing the Palestinian Liberation Organization, moving any problems on and restraints of the movement of members of either party. Activating the Freedom Committee, activating the reconciliation on social level, ensuring that national elections will take place simultaneously for the president, for the Legislative Council, and for the Palestinian National Council as well, at a time determined by the president, but within 6 months. It will also ensure that a new technocrat government is formed within 5 weeks. It will put a lot of energy, life into the Palestinian political arena once again, and ensure that Gaza is no longer a part outside of the Palestinian politics, but an integral part of the Palestinian territories. How that will be perceived by the Israelis, so far what we heard from Netanyahu was not positive. However, we can only perceive this as a positive act because it would be easier for the Israelis to negotiate with one body and one voice rather than have to negotiate with different parts of the Palestinian society. It will also mean that the one political organization and one government will take control and responsibility for the situation in Gaza and the West Bank simultaneously. It will mean that the Palestinians will engage in dialogue, democratic institution building, which will improve the situation in Gaza politically, economically, and socially, which can only be translated into better security for everyone. It will mean that there will be no restrictions on the movement of goods, and goods will be monitored in accordance with the agreements and regulations guaranteed by the EU and the international community, which will improve security, the security situation of the Palestinians and the Israelis as well. So, unfortunately, it seems that the Israelis have not moved beyond analyzing the situation politically into realizing that it is a step forward.
But Dr. Kami, haven't we been here before? We've had the Mecca Agreement, we've had the Cairo Agreement, now we have the Gaza Agreement. What chances of success do you think today's agreement will have?
Well, you're right to point to the fact that this has never worked. We know that for a number of years, Fatah and Hamas have made many attempts to try and unite, and it has not worked. Now, what gives this time, or this chance, this gives it a better chance, I think, is the context. First of all, Hamas is considerably weakened by the presence of a hostile Egyptian government bombardment and the destruction of the tunnels, which were very important for Gaza's economy. So they're quite weakened and would be much more ready for a unification agreement than previously. Secondly, and very importantly, the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank sees that the negotiated settlement, which they have staked everything on, it looks very unlikely, very shaky. So they've decided to become proactive. Now, whereas I've just said, and I think this does give this agreement a much better chance than any previously, the Palestinian leadership on the West Bank has reassured by its stance, rather proactive stance with regard to Israel and the United States, is very much the kind of thing that Hamas wanted to see. So they'd like to do that. Now, we can't fool ourselves, though. These are, in the end, we have to be clear that they might be ploys to get the negotiations restarted on a better footing for the Palestinians than previously. Because from my point of view, and watching Mahmoud Abbas and the way he has behaved over many years, he has no other strategy except to really pursue the negotiations.
But you heard Bibi Netanyahu's remarks earlier today saying you can have a peace with Hamas or with Israel, but you can have one or the other. Isn't it likely that this deal will be another reason for him to stall further on the peace negotiations?
Of course. Look, the Israeli position is very clear, which is to put off the possibility of a peaceful settlement for as long as possible. That is their policy. They have no other. And therefore, anything that presents itself as an opportunity to delay the settlement is the thing that they will welcome. He will make a big deal out of this. And if the Americans toe the line, as they have done previously with Israel, they always take their lead from the Israelis, they might follow him and, put pressure on the Palestinians.
Sarah, what can the international community do this time round to ensure the success? In the past, we didn't support these peace deals. What can we do now?
Well, I think there's 2 points. I think, one, they have to be honest and call Netanyahu out around this thing about peace with Israel. Netanyahu's not offered peace. During these negotiations, over 50 Palestinians have been killed. There were 56 up to the beginning, up to middle of March. And so peace has never been offered, as Dr. Kami said. Secondly, again, as Dr. Kami said, we have been here before. We had the short-lived unity government that came after the Palestinian elections. And I think we have to lay the responsibility for the failure of that at the door of the international community, at Israel, but also at our own government's door, because the UN, the EU and Israel all acted to destroy the chances of that unity government happening. And so I think the challenge now is how our government and how the international community reacts to measures to try to unify, to try and demand those basic national rights, the rights of self-determination, the right to live free from the threats of threat to life, the right to work, the right to travel. The problem is that actually, when we're talking about the unity and freedom of movement and travel, as Dr. Fadi was saying, you can't escape the reality that Gaza and the West Bank are still under occupation. And so it's not actually in the gift of Palestinians to have that freedom of movement and travel and goods. Mm-hmm. It actually is about, and again, we have to recognise the reality that Palestinians live under occupation. There's an occupation and an occupier.
Fadi, isn't this a high-risk strategy on the part of Abu Mazen? Because if Congress follows out its threat now that if there was a reconciliation or the formation of a technocrat government that would withdraw US funding from the Palestinian Authority, what will happen if Congress does go ahead and withdraws funding?
We've heard that so many times before, Oliver. Every now and then we hear threats from the U.S. administration or the Congress or a third party that funding will be stopped to the Palestinian Authority, and the Israelis will withhold the tax and they collect on our behalf and will not transfer our money to us, and so on and so on. We have reached a point where thanks to this ongoing strategy and being proactive for quite a few years on establishing a stronger ground on the international community for realizing the Palestinian rights and Palestinian state, we have the tools now to confront this. For example, by signing the Anti-Corruption Convention last month, we have new tools that enable the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian institutions to track down and reclaim money that belongs to the Palestinian people that have been displaced outside. For example, today, Mr. Annatcha has submitted a request to the Egyptian authorities to transfer back about 40 million US dollars under the same umbrella of corruption that were located in some Egyptian accounts. This is not an isolated case. There are money and funds everywhere that belong to the Palestinian people that, thanks to this process, we can claim back. Therefore, these threats, first of all, they're not new to us. We reached a point where we must take a stand, and we are taking a stand. Third, we have new tools to enable us to confront these threats and being self-sufficient. The biggest realization and the biggest change because of this reconciliation agreement today is ensuring that there is no Palestinian state without Gaza, and Gaza is not a state. The Palestinian state will be realized on all the Palestinian territories.
I think the other tool that you have, which is very important, is international public opinion. And that is something that has been polled quite systematically by, for example, the BBC. And it's very clear that majority public support for Palestine exists. It is growing. And that's the reason why the discussion we had earlier about boycott, investment and sanctions is having a real impact on the Israeli government. That if it wasn't having an impact, they would not be employing two people over in the Israeli embassy in London specifically on examining BDS and tactics to confront that. And so I think that what you have is an organised structure of Palestine Solidarity Campaign and groups right across the world that are mobilising communities in support of Palestinian rights, that are encouraging people to take action, even if it's just not buying Israeli goods in the stores, or it's campaigning against a particular company that's complicit, that profits from Israel's crimes, not to be included in a bid. There's a lot that individuals can do, and I think it's not a case anymore of people sitting back and complaining. I think the other thing, just quickly, is that we have to be very clear about confronting crime and upholding international law. When we have a situation where, for example, Tzipi Livni, who has been was one of the architects of the bombing and war on Gaza in 2008-2009, when she is allowed into the country and she evades international law and evades international justice, as she will be doing on the 15th of May, we need to be standing up, and that's the reason why Palestine Solidarity Campaign is organising a protest against Tzipi Livni's entry into this country, because we do believe that war criminals need to be prosecuted, not fated.
Dr. Karmi, you've been in the field for a long time, being an advocate for Palestinian rights, Palestinian independence. Have you seen a growth in support for Palestine in recent years?
Yes, I mean, without question. When I started being an activist, which, as you say, was a long time ago, the picture was completely different. It's now changed almost 180 degrees. As Sarah says, she's quite right. The support for Palestine at the popular level, at the people's level, is striking. It really is. But you see, all this is fine, but the Palestinian leadership has to capitalize on it. And by that I mean they need to really do something very different from what they've done hitherto. They need to be courageous, and they need to take the bull by the horns. I tell you what I mean. A very significant development, which I don't think we've quite mentioned yet, has been the announcement by the Palestinian leadership of a possible dissolution of the Palestinian Authority. Now, this is a very important development, in my opinion. If it is not just a ploy, which is one must suspect that it is, if it is not just a ploy to frighten the Israelis and the Americans into coming back to the negotiating table, if it is not that, if it were to be done seriously, one can only imagine the problem that Israel would have if there were no Palestinian Authority anymore and Israel had to directly confront the occupied territories and to deal with them, administer them, spend billions more on security, etc., etc. Now, if that were to happen, and I shall propose something else, if the Palestinians were then to go on and say, look, you, Israel, have ruled us, are ruling us, you're ruling us all the time, even though we had this thing called the Palestinian Authority, which was really there to help you police the territories, but which now has had enough and therefore has gone. You are now ruling us directly. We have a demand, which is that we demand equal rights with the Jews whom you rule. We are non-Jews, they are Jews, and you rule us in an apartheid way. You discriminate. We don't want to be discriminated against. We demand our rights. Now, I put it to you, try and imagine a scenario like this. Given the degree of world support at the popular level for the Palestinians, for their rights, one can only imagine how much of a chord that would strike with most people, that this occupied, oppressed people is demanding nothing more strange or outlandish than to have equal rights. And I think you would get a total sea change in this whole picture. Now, I understand your questions about the international community and what can be done and so on. But, you know, the international community has done very little for the Palestinians. The European Union has indeed funded the Palestinians, but they've actually funded the Israeli occupation. The Palestinians need help politically. And they have not ever had that from the international community.
Fadi, I'd like to pick up on that. Is the threat of a disillusionment of the PA for real, or is it just a tactical ploy?
We have passed the tactical ploys phase. We are talking seriously. We're making a stand. The Palestinian leadership have been clear about it for a very long time, specifically in the past 9 months of negotiations with the Israelis. And please allow me to correct one thing for Dr. Karmi here regarding that the Palestinians are using tactics or tools to bring the Israelis back to the negotiating table. That is not correct. It's the Israelis and the Americans that want us to remain on the negotiating table, want us to continue negotiating. And we are the ones who are pulling back. We are the ones who are saying, if this does not pay off, if there are no practical results, we're not going to negotiate for the sake of negotiating. So it's the other way around. And the fact that the Palestinian factions, Hamas, Fatah, and other independent political powers within the Palestinian political spectrum have signed the Egyptian agreement for reconciliation, joined Doha in signing the Doha paper, and signed the agreement in Gaza earlier today, it does confirm that the Palestinians are adamant and are determined to realize a Palestinian state and are not going to just settle for civil rights or humanitarian rights within an Israeli state, giving up their identity, their history, and their long political struggle. It is much clearer than that.
Good. Sarah, if it did come to that the PA feel there's no further, or the PLO feel there's no further room for negotiations and do actually decide to disband the authority, what should the response of the international community be?
I think it should be very clearly to support the demands for equality, the demands for equal rights, against racism, against apartheid. These are demands that were raised by the ANC during the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And as Dr. Kami said, they are very reasonable demands. They're demands that increasingly people are identifying on Palestine, understanding what's going on in Palestine. And I think they relate, as came through in the discussion earlier, these relate to Palestinians who are currently passport holders of Israeli passport holders, Palestinian refugees, Palestinians who live in the West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem. It's a demand that can unite all Palestinians. And so I think for the international community, for supporters of Palestinian rights, it is simply to act as a voice to continue to amplify those demands. There are demands that we would demand of ourselves, for ourselves, and why can we not demand that the Palestinians have those same rights?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dr. Kami. Thank you, Fadi. And there's plenty to be talked about. Thank you.